Welcome, my friends, to Inside the Minds of Authors. I'm DC Gomez, and I'm thrilled you're joining me today for a fun conversation with a passionate author. We're kicking off the program, like it's our tradition, with a short reading from the feature book. I hope you guys enjoy it. Let's get started.
Hi, this is Jeff Giles. I'm the author of Langley Powell and the Society for the Defense of the Mundane, and this is how the book begins. Death, thought Langley Powell, might be the most mundane thing on earth. To most people, mundane might seem like something of an insult, particularly in this context. After all, what kind of person could possibly contemplate the end of life and call it ordinary? Unless you're a complete wacko, death is something to be feared and avoided, or at least staved off as long as possible. Deeming it mundane would seem to indicate a lack of respect for the sanctity of life. Needless to say, Langley Powell was not like most people. Not that he meant mundane in a negative way. Not at all. In fact, as any of the millions of people who had attended his seminars, purchased his books, or watched his television appearances could tell you, for Langley Powell, mundanity should be held in the highest regard. When questioned, he was fond of reaching into his satchel and removing a pocket edition of the New Oxford American Dictionary, letting it fall open to a page that had been consulted so many times it no longer even needed a bookmark. Here, he'd say, pointing to the word, mundane, of this earthly world rather than a heavenly or spiritual one. Of course, as the other person involved in these conversations invariably pointed out, and as you yourself might be noticing if you've opened your own New Oxford American Dictionary to see the definition of mundane for yourself, Langley Powell's preferred meaning of the word is listed second, after the first and most commonly accepted, which is lacking interest or excitement, dull. To anyone unfamiliar with Langley's finely honed stage patter, this always sounded like a solid retort, but they quickly discovered that the whole thing was really just a carefully constructed opening for him to step through, explaining to an invariably enraptured audience that earthly and dull had only grown connected in the human imagination after centuries of slander by charlatans and scoundrels. To twist a phrase I loaned the great singer-songwriter Paul Simon, Earth is a place of miracles and wonder, Langley would say at his seminars, pausing for a moment to soak in the applause that always greeted the photo of the two on stage during their joint appearance on Saturday Night Live. What could be more wonderful than a resplendent sunrise to greet the day? What could be more majestic than one of our planet's many natural monuments? What could be more soothing than the sound of the ocean? I could go on, but I'm sure you see my point. Mundane is the furthest thing from dull. Our earthly surroundings are awe-inspiring, and they deserve to be defended from those who seek to distract us and enrich themselves with ideas of fantastical phenomena and unseen spiritual planes. The next time you see a person who claims to be able to tell fortunes, contact the dead, move objects with his mind, or anything else that flies in the face of established science, I implore you, think of the mundane. Remember, it's all we have, and it's so much more than enough. After delivering that last line to thunderous applause, Langley would bow with a carefully practiced flourish and leave the stage, often heading directly to the airport to catch a flight to his next speaking engagement, and always thousands of dollars richer, an irony that seemed more or less completely lost to the attendees who had paid handsome sums to hear Langley urging them not to give psychics and seers their money. Not that Langley's intentions were anything less than pure. The truth was that despite the fact that he delivered essentially the same performance every time he took the stage and had rehearsed every moment of it so thoroughly that he could have gotten through a show without giving it much conscious thought at all, he really believed everything he told his audiences. Langley was genuinely convinced that people all over the world had long been lulled into a false belief that not only were there aspects of human existence beyond our understanding, but that they were often somehow preferable to observable reality itself. He saw himself as a general on the battlefield in the war against logic, and although he'd developed a keen sense of showmanship over the years, he took his self-appointed responsibility seriously. To those who knew and frequently rolled their eyes at Langley, taking things seriously was something he excelled at to an exhausting degree. An only child, Langley had perplexed his parents in a variety of ways, none more so than the near total lack of a sense of humor he'd grown into during his late childhood. His mother was a teacher, and his father worked as a lineman for the telephone company. both solid, largely unexceptional careers that many would view as the less flattering variety of mundane, but well paying enough to afford the Powells a comfortable suburban existence. A yard, a dog, a television in the living room. Young Langley had all the perks of middle class living in post war America, and as a small child, he'd seemed to enjoy them all, adding to the robust soundtrack of the Powell household with all the cacophonous laughter, imaginary battle sounds, and slamming of screen doors that have gone along with young boys for generations. In other words, by virtually any definition, young Langley Powell's life was good, and the stage was set for him to grow into a man every bit as light-hearted and gregarious as his parents. He might very well have become that man too, if not for the thrilling exploits and humiliating fall of Neville Pemberton. He's barely a cultural footnote to the audiences of today, but when Langley was a boy, Neville Pemberton was a major star of stage and screen. And whether he was wowing crowds at Radio City Music Hall or reducing Johnny Carson to astonished guffaws, there seemed to be no act of wonder too great for him to perform. Could he read minds? Absolutely. Bend spoons and move objects with the power of his mind? Just watch him. Card tricks and other acts of prestidigitation beyond compare? Child's play. For decades, he was the world's premier paranormalist, and despite the efforts of countless would-be debunkers, no one had ever managed to find a rational explanation for Pemberton's amazing abilities. For the kids of young Langley's generation, there wasn't anything quite as exciting as a Neville Pemberton appearance. His guest spots on talk shows were not to be missed. His television specials were always cafeteria conversation fodder the following day. And if you were lucky enough to have parents who were willing or able to score the family tickets for a live show, well, you were a legend of the playground. The youth of America were enraptured by Pemberton, and Langley Powell was no exception. From the posable Pemberton action figure to the lunchbox and thermos set emblazoned with his name face and a colorful logo, from the Pemberton magic set to a lifetime membership in Pemberton's Association of the Inexplicable, he had it all. So ardent was Langley's hero worship that when Pemberton was challenged to a test of his powers on live television, it scarcely even occurred to him that the outcome would be anything but yet another humiliating defeat for the latest non-believer. So certain was Langley in his idol's abilities that he agreed to wager every penny he'd stored up in his piggy bank against Orson Meade, a third-grade classmate whose scornful dismissal of Pemberton's might had been a source of irritation all school year. And when, on the fateful night, Neville Pemberton confidently strolled out before a live studio audience and faced his challenger, only to stutter in red-faced astonishment as he failed test after test, Langley resolutely believed it would all be explained as a terrible mistake of some sort, or the result of underhanded behind-the-scenes trickery. Standing lone and defiant before his peers, he insisted the mighty Pemberton had been framed. It was not to be. The following day, Pemberton faced a throng of reporters at a press conference and admitted that the jig was up. All of his amazing feats had been carefully orchestrated tricks, and while he would never reveal how he'd done it, his career as a full-time source of wonder was officially over. As Neville Pemberton stepped away from the podium and out of the public eye, Langley's shock and horror quickly curdled into a deep-seated disillusionment that would permanently alter the course of his life. He handed his money over to the hated Orson, mutely accepting the mockery that would become his birthright for the rest of his youth and adolescence. Never again simply Langley, he would always be greeted with snorts of, "Hey, Merlin," or, "Well, if it isn't the wizard." He stopped wearing hats after being asked for the 100th time if he had a rabbit hidden in them. He couldn't so much pick up a pencil without some idiot screaming "Alakazam" and triggering uproarious laughter from the rest of the class. In high school, other boys joked that they needed to keep their girlfriends away from Langley lest he attempt to saw them in half. The great irony here, not that any of his doltish classmates ever bothered to notice, was that after Neville Pemberton's disgrace, Langley lost all interest in magic and the supernatural. In fact, the more he was taunted, the more he hated anything to do with any of it. And by the time he collected his high school diploma, he had long since vowed to leave town, reinvent himself at a college several states away, and never lay eyes on one of his youthful tormentors ever again. In a critical thinking class the following fall, Langley's heart was struck like a bell by the professor's opening lecture. Listening to the man's impassioned defense of reason, he knew immediately which path he was destined to follow. Like so many college freshmen, Langley quickly learned firsthand how satisfying it can be to find yourself in a different place among different people, and in many ways he flourished. Freed from the burden of his misguided faith in a laughingstock, he made friends, joined clubs, and quickly rose to the top of his class. He even started wearing hats again. But whenever he returned home for a holiday or school break, it was as if he'd never left. Orson Mead, by now a college dropout who worked nights at the local bottling plant and lived in a one-room apartment over a laundromat, still hurled the same old insults at Langley whenever they crossed paths. Eventually, much to his parents' confusion and chagrin, he more or less stopped coming home at all. But while Langley's relationship with his parents was strained during his college years, things improved after he entered the professional world and started building a career for himself as a professional debunker. His business grew slowly at first, with his first couple years of clients coming from aggravated relatives of people who'd been fleeced by overpriced psychics or alleged spiritual mediums who'd made off with great chunks of their Mark's savings. But he soon developed a reputation as someone who could quickly and persuasively undermine and expose his targets. Before long, he was making talk show appearances of his own, trading barbs with indignant clairvoyants and eclipsing their celebrity one television spot at a time. By the time he was 30, Langley could afford to fly his parents wherever he wanted to meet them rather than enduring another return visit to his hometown. By the time he was 40, he was able to purchase a Brooklyn brownstone, remodeling it into a duplex he shared with them. He'd grown into a doting son, albeit one who was also definitely something of a party pooper. By the time Langley's parents passed away, they'd been able to watch him ascend to full-blown celebrity status, embarking on a series of sold-out seminars while continuing to maintain regular appearances on late-night talk shows. He was the subject of a documentary, Langley Powell and the Defense of the Mundane, that broke box office records when it was picked up by a studio after screening at Sundance. When Langley's publicist talked him into launching his own website, the members of his robust online forum christened themselves the Society for the Defense of the Mundane. Decades after Neville Pemberton had ceased to be anything more than a faint memory for most of the public, the young boy who'd been humiliated by Pemberton's debunking had grown up to be the world's foremost debunker, exposing countless frauds along the way. All of which is to say that on the last afternoon of Langley Powell's life, as he was strolling down his street, tossing a grapefruit gently up and down in one hand while listening to his latest podcast appearance on the walk back to his brownstone from the corner bodega, he was in a pretty good mood. It was a beautiful day. He'd just signed a lucrative new book deal, and he was right then having a piano hoisted up to the 5th floor where he envisioned spending countless hours playing. Perhaps Paul Simon might stop by. And all of that is to explain why Langley, lost in his sunny afternoon reverie, didn't hear the cries of oops and look out until it was too late. Langley only had the briefest of instants to look up and realize what was about to happen to him. Just enough time for the events we've just recounted here to flash before his eyes and to finally conclude that yes, death really might be the most mundane thing on earth. With the exception of his years of torment at the hands of Orson Mead, who now rented shoes at the local bowling alley and worked part-time as an assistant to the high school wrestling coach, Langley had enjoyed a remarkably fortunate life, which is perhaps why he observed his impending demise with a surprising degree of bemused detachment. So this was the end. He'd had a good run. Also, the underside of a piano was surprisingly aesthetically pleasing from this angle. Who could complain? And then, just as he closed his eyes, braced himself for the moment of impact, and prepared to say goodbye to existence forever, Langley heard the sound and felt the great relief of the largest flatulence he'd ever experienced. He'd never done anything so uncouth in public, but he couldn't stop himself. The feeling was as blissful as anything he could remember. It seemed to go on forever, so long, in fact, that he wondered how he hadn't already been crushed by the piano. Feeling simultaneously lighter and immensely appalled, he opened his eyes to see his new piano shattered to pieces on the sidewalk, with some unfortunate person's legs poking out from underneath the wreckage. A crowd had gathered, murmuring things like, "So tragic," and "unbelievable," and "what a stupid way to go." Sirens blared from several blocks away. Looking around in stunned disbelief, Langley tried to piece together what could have happened. Had the person under the piano pushed him out of the way? Had he experienced some sort of strange vertigo and only thought he was in its path? And why was the corpse wearing his shoes? Langley gingerly stepped closer to the gathering crowd, peering over the shoulder of a man filming the scene with his phone. Yes, those were definitely his shoes, and also his pants, and that was definitely his grapefruit rolling into the gutter. "Excuse me," he said to the man, determined to get closer. "I live here. That was my piano." The man didn't move, didn't stop filming, didn't acknowledge Langley at all. "Excuse me," Langley repeated himself, louder this time. I live here. That was my piano. Would you kindly step aside? Once again, the man failed to register Langley's presence. Outraged, Langley reached out to tap him on the shoulder and watched in astonishment as his finger, followed by his entire hand up to the wrist, passed straight through the man without making any impact at all. It felt warm and moist, somehow simultaneously comforting and repulsive. Langley instinctively jerked his arm back and stared at it, gawping in horrified amazement. Langley Powell had dedicated his entire adult life to honoring the observable, the provable, the known. He had urged millions of people to use their good senses to observe the world around them, draw rational conclusions, and reject the rest. By his own standards, there was only one possible deduction he could possibly make. Langley Powell had died and become a ghost. He was, in a word, annoyed.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Inside the Minds of Authors. I'm excited you guys are joining us. We're getting ready to start wrapping up the season, so I am excited you guys are joining us for these last few authors who have been amazing. Today, I'm super excited because we have an amazing author, and this book hopefully has captivated you as much as I do, because I feel bad for Mr. Langley. He just did not deserve to go down that way, so let's get started. Hello, Mr. Jeff. How are you?
I'm great. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's such a pleasure. Congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
We need to have the most obvious questions because I am curious. Where did this book come from? Where does this idea and why did you have to kill him? Tell us.
I had a coworker who made a habit of threatening to haunt me anytime I upset her. She would say, "After I die, I'm going to come back and I'm going to haunt you." And she's like half my age. So I think one day I said, "You know what? There's no way you're going to outlive me. So I'll come and haunt you." And she said, "You don't even believe in ghosts." And I said, "That's actually true. And wouldn't it be kind of funny if somebody who didn't believe in ghosts ended up becoming one? And then wouldn't it be even funnier than that if your entire personality revolved around not believing in ghosts and you became one?" So that was where it started.
That is probably the best story I've heard of the beginning of a book in a very long time. I'm like, okay, I can see the beginning of this. So tell us about this book. So it is really dark comedy. I'm going with urban fantasy. You can tell me yay or nay. I need to know more. What are we expecting from it? And where are you taking us in this crazy adventure, this poor guy?
It is a supernatural comedy. When I was writing it, I envisioned it as a book for middle grade readers, but while I was shopping it, I was told that that is not what this is. So it's it's a comedy that takes place in the afterlife. Shortly after the portion that I read, Langley meets Frank, who is essentially his guide to the afterlife. Frank is a sort of a government employee who has the appearance of a young boy because that's how old he was when he died, but he has the mouth of a sailor and has no respect for Langley whatsoever and likes to insult and mock him as they go about the afterlife. And then not long after they meet, they become embroiled in what they are told is a very important mission to save the universe from being destroyed.
Yes, I like the idea that the afterlife is governed with the government because why wouldn't it be? That'd just be way too easy if it wasn't.
Right, right, exactly.
Well, let's talk about that comedy part because you had a blast in reading it. Like just your expressions were lovely about it. And there's that enough to make you go, ooh, I feel bad for him. This story as you develop this character, what are some of your favorite parts about it?
Boy, well, first, Langley, you do feel bad for him. Sort of the gist in the beginning is that the entire universe is sort of laughing at him. There are a lot of celebrity cameos in the book, and the first one that he meets is Albert Einstein, who explains to him how the universe works and what a twisted sense of humor the universe tends to have. As Langley goes along in his journey, he evolves a little bit and becomes less of a party pooper and more of somebody who can recognize that that he was wrong and he needs to let go of some of the things that he believed, and letting go of what weighs you down is a big part of the book. Some of my favorite parts, there's a point where Langley meets Tom Petty in the afterlife. He and Frank are in hot pursuit of this person that they think is going to destroy the universe, and he ends up going to the house where Tom Petty lives in the afterlife. And Tom Petty spends pretty much their entire conversation complaining about what a rotten neighbor Johnny Carson is in Malibu, of the afterlife, because he and Ed McMahon just go around whacking golf balls into people's windows. There's another part that involves a lot of mom jokes, which I have a childish sense of humor. They make me laugh. So that part too. And underneath the humor, I think there's some thoughtfulness, and it's also kind of a sweet book too. It isn't just all about the laughs.
This is such a very different way of looking at the afterlife, especially as we're looking at society who's terrified with death and we're terrified with aging.
Yes.
So to give it a different spin of it kind of gives people a lot more hope. And it kind of gives you an open conversation. What is your goal with the book? What are you hoping readers will take from it?
Well, I have been told that it makes people laugh and it has made some people cry. What else could you want from a book, right? What else could you what else could you ask for from a novel to make you feel something? So if that happens, if people read it and it makes them feel things, then I think I've done my job.
Great way of looking at it. And the fact that it comes with such a range of emotions, I love it. With this book, is this a standalone? Are you looking at continuing this adventure? That you're going, I am done with their stories, I'm moving on. What is the plan?
It ends on a very open note. So if enough people buy it and the publisher tells me they want another one, then I'll be happy to oblige. I'm working on another novel now that is not this. It's not supernatural at all. But
Tell us about it.
yeah, it's a detective story. It's sort of a Chinatown with jokes. If you've seen the movie Chinatown, you know
Mhm.
it's not known for being particularly funny. This will be similar in that I think in the end, the detective will come to realize that even though he solved the case and caught the bad guy, it doesn't really matter because there's too much money and power involved. But I don't intend for it to be as depressing as the end of the actual Chinatown.
It's encouraging. That is very, very encouraging. Tell us, how did you tackle your projects? How did you go from one to another? How does that process work for you?
I'm probably not as deliberate as I could be. I know there are some people who just show up every day and wait for the muse to do what it's going to do. And if the muse doesn't arrive that day, then they'll just write something that is not very inspired anyway, just to, keep at it. I do try to blog every day just so I'm always writing and I don't have to shake any rust off when it's time. But how do I go from project to project? I don't know if I have an answer to that. I finished writing this book about 4 years ago, and then I spent a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, trying to find an agent, which, as someone who talks to authors probably knows, is not the easiest thing in the world.
Not at all.
Yeah, I have self-published before. I thought that this one was sellable, and I wanted to give it my best shot before I caved in and self-published. And so, anyway, that took up a chunk of time that I was not really writing anything. And then I signed the deal with Humorist, and right around the time the book was getting ready to come out, I had the idea for this new one that I'm working on now. And I'm also working on a couple of nonfiction things. I don't know the answer to your question. I don't know how I go from project to project. I just do whatever is calling to me at that moment, I guess.
And that's a very acceptable answer that it hasn't have to be. I know some people manage multiple projects at a time.
Yeah.
I'm not that person. I would love to be. My mind does not handle that many projects in one head. So I'm always curious how writers do it. So as a person in the process of writing, publishing, promoting, which is a lot in itself, what advice would you give an up and coming author who's in that situation and needs a little bit of motivation to keep going?
I think it can be difficult to try to encourage writers without, like, you don't want to sell aspirational writers a bill of goods, right? You don't want to tell them that what they're doing is probably going to pay their bills. You don't want to tell them that any of it's going to be easy. I think the only advice I have would really to be that pursuing something like this really should be its own reward. You should be doing it because you feel like you have to do it. You feel like there's just this compulsion. You have something that needs to get out. Before I wrote this book, I never believed I had a novel in me. And I only started writing it. And maybe you can relate to this, but I only started writing it after it nagged at me for a while. It felt like, yeah, you're nodding. It felt like a burr under the saddle. It was,
It doesn't let you
and
sleep and the idea won't go away.
yeah, right. And the only choice you have is just to let it take you where it wants to go. So I think that's my best advice for writers. You should do it because you feel like you need to do it. Everything else is not as important. Everything that comes after is not as important.
Sometimes I think writers forget the joy of writing because we make it really, really serious. And we forget that the process as a whole should be really fun and is very enjoyable. And you get to create your own universe. So how much more fun can that be?
Exactly.
I love it. Then tell me here, where can people find your book? Where they can learn more about you, where you're located. Tell us about that.
They can find my book wherever they want to buy books. It's on Amazon, it's on Audible. I didn't know this existed before the book came out, but apparently there is like an AI voice that will narrate audiobooks. Yeah, it was news
Uh-huh.
to me. So there's an audiobook, there's a Kindle. You can get it on Amazon, you can get it at your local bookstore. If you know, order it through them, they're probably not going to have it on their shelves when you walk in the door, but you can get it wherever books are sold. I personally am in New Hampshire. I'm in the southwest corner in a smallish town called Keene. We are like half an hour from Vermont. And you can find me, well, there's a Langley Powell website, langleypowell.com, and that has links to my newsletter and my Twitter feed. Yeah, you can find me all those places. Please do.
Well, people will, and they will like to connect, and you do have a newsletter. So that is absolutely awesome. People definitely will be looking for it. I'm excited about the audiobook. That's usually what I'm now getting into doing my reading so I can do work and write and all that fun stuff. So I love it. Okay, dear, before you leave us, are you ready for the lightning round?
I hope so.
Easy peasy. Do not think too hard about things. Let's go.
All right.
Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Nice. Fruit or vegetables?
Oh, God. If I have to pick, I guess I'll pick fruit.
Not that hard. Knight or prince?
I'll go with the night. Let's do the night. Less inbreeding if you're a knight, probably.
That's actually a very rational way of looking at it. I was thinking out prince because I would have to go fighting, but okay, I like. City or country?
I mean, I'm talking to you from a very non-city environment. So in order to be honest, I probably had to say country. Yeah.
Not bad. Here's a little different. If your life had a warning label, what would it be?
Oh boy. If my life had a warning label, what would it be? Not appropriate for children? I don't know.
This explains why the book did not make it to middle grade. I'm seeing a pattern here. I like. Awesome. Dear, it has been a pleasure. Any closing remarks for us?
No, just it's been a real pleasure for me too. And again, thank you for making room for me. I appreciate it.
I am excited about the book. Congratulations again. Continue the amazing work. Next year, let us know when the next one comes out. We're looking forward to it. So, congratulations
Thank you.
to our listeners. Go ahead, check out the book, have a laugh, enjoy the afterlife with a little twist. It'll be amazing. And remember, we're going to be back next week to our last episode. So, you don't want to miss out. And make sure to subscribe so you're always in tune when we're back. Everyone, have an amazing day. Bye.